Smaug, the boastful fire drake who hoarded the dwarves' treasure in their mountain home Erebor, is probably the most famous dragon in modern fantasy. And Tolkien fans have good reason to love him. His cunning greed and ultimately his spectacular demise in the Battle of the Five Armies are central to the plot of The Hobbit. He's such a pop culture icon that he even has his own entry in the Dictionary of Archaic English Slang, defined as a stupid, bombastic bully, a blustering coward, a worthless fellow. And yet, for all his swagger, Smaug is really not that impressive by comparison to some of the dragons who stalk humanity's oldest myths. Today, we look at 5 of history's most fearsome dragons. Number 5, Fafnir of Norse legend. Fafnir is an odd case in the Norse sagas or stories because while he begins his life as a monstrous dragon, he ends it as a man. Now don't get too excited, because Fafnir spends most of his second form sleeping for 60 years. Still, there's no denying that the saga of Fafnir, the dragon's story as it appears in the prose Edda, one of the foundational texts of Norse literature, is far more grim than anything in Tolkien's works. Fafnir's father, the king of the dwarves, Hreidmar, was killed by Loki, the trickster god, when the latter was in human form and seeking to hide his elven wife Sigyn. Loki wasn't very good at hiding things. When the dwarven king's sons avenged their father by slaying Loki, the gods demanded the return of their slain brother. As compensation, they gave the surviving brothers a treasure hoard guarded by Fafnir, whose name means the greedy one. No surprise there, then, that once he learned magic, he transformed into a dragon and took over his own cave full of gold and gems, which included, according to Snorri Sturluson, author of the prose Edda, the very same treasure that would later be stolen by the legendary Viking Ragnar Lothbrok. This version of the story takes place in a post-Christian Scandinavia, where Christianity is clearly being used as a lens through which to view pagan beliefs. For in the original poem that Snorri adapted, Fafnir is instead a giant serpent who turns himself into a dragon only for his battle with Sigurd, the man who would become King Arthur's mentor. In this tale, Sigurd is tricked into killing Fafnir, who had been guarding the hoard after having earned its protection by helping a farmer named Lit. Or if you prefer your dragons poetic, there's always John Gardner's brilliant reimagining of the Norse myths in The Dragon, where Fafnir is given a much more sympathetic telling. Number 4, Jörmungandr, the World Serpent. One of the most haunting images in Norse mythology is that of Jörmungandr, also known as the Midgard serpent, slithering around the whole earth, so big that it can bite its own tail and keep itself company. The first mention of the Midgard serpent comes from the Elder Edda, written down around the year 1270, where it's described as the offspring of Loki and the giantess Angerboda. Obviously, Odin couldn't allow another prophecy to come true without trying to stop it, so he threw Jörmungandr into the sea, where it grew into a huge serpent, eventually encircling the whole planet. In the younger Edda, Snorri tells us that one day Jörmungandr will rise up out of the sea during Ragnarok and devour Odin, which is a shame because Odin is pretty much the only god willing to put up with humanity's nonsense. Jörmungandr's coils represent chaos and destruction, but they also symbolize the cyclical nature of time, since the serpent is forever caught in an eternal loop. Jörmungandr is usually depicted as a sea monster, but occasionally the Eddas call it a lindworm, a kind of wingless dragon common in Germanic folklore. Either way, Jörmungandr is one of the most recognizable figures in Norse art, showing up everywhere from rune stones to the Bayeux Tapestry. Number 3, the Chinese Dragon Kings. Westerners tend to think of dragons as scaly reptilian monsters, but dragons have always had a dual nature, symbolized by their shape-shifting ability. In many cultures, dragons are wise, benevolent beings associated with water and weather. In China, dragons have been revered as divine animals since at least the Shang dynasty around 1600 BCE. The earliest surviving text to feature a dragon is the 1776 BCE divination classic Yu Shi, where the oracular god of dragons tells the ruler of Shang that he'll win a battle against the neighboring kingdom of Song. Over the centuries, dragons became increasingly important in Chinese myth and religion, eventually developing their own pantheon, headed by the Jade Emperor. Each dragon king ruled over one of 4 seas: East, South, West, and North, each with their own consort and children. The eldest of these children was the rain-bringing azure dragon, who became one of the 4 symbols of the Chinese constellations. Chinese dragons are mostly benevolent, but they do have a nasty streak. Sometimes they take human form to kidnap maidens, often as punishment for boasting. But dragons can also be dangerous to mortals. Even in their human forms, dragons can turn back into their monstrous selves at will and eat people. You know, just to remind you who's really in charge. Number 2, Smaug of Slavic folklore, of Slavic. While the Scandinavian countries have the Norse myths, Eastern Europe has their own native mythology, full of fantastic beasts like the Smaug. Zmei means dragon or serpent, and Gorinik refers to a creature's number of necks, in this case 3. Despite his name, though, the Zmei Gorinik doesn't look like any normal serpent. It's got wings, a mane of bristling hairs, a sharp beak, and claws. And instead of scales, the Zmei's body is covered in tiny tiles, which means that if you want to kill him, you can't cut him open. You have to rip off all the tiles one by one. In Slavic folklore, Zmeis are water spirits, and each one guards a powerful magical treasure consisting of either gold or a beautiful princess. And that shouldn't be all that surprising. After all, we're talking about a dragon here. Not to mention whoever removed the last tile from his armor would gain supernatural powers. And if that sounds daunting, it's because it is. Although the hero always wins in the end, defeating the Zmei Gorinik and taking his treasure, the cost in lives is usually very high. In the Russian folktale, Vasilisa the Beautiful, a peasant girl has to marry the vicious firebird, a winged horse, and ride him into the sky, where she must pluck out his feathers one by one, just like the tiles on the Zmei's body. But every time she does, Firebird falls lower to the ground, causing villages to be burned up in his flaming breath. Number 1, Typhon. Perhaps no monster struck as deeply into the heart of Hellenic civilization as Typhon, a gigantic dragon-like beast who challenged Zeus to a duel and nearly ended the Olympian order before it began. According to Hesiod, Typhon was the offspring of Gaia, the personification of the earth, and Tartarus, the personification of the underworld, which made him both literally and metaphorically the child of the earth. Given his parentage, it's not surprising that Typhon was huge, able to fill the air with his wings as he flew around the earth. There are multiple versions of the tale of Typhon's defeat, but they all agree on 2 things. First, Typhon was so terrifying that all the gods fled from him, except for Zeus. Second, Zeus defeated Typhon by hurling lightning bolts at him until he collapsed and died. But even in death, Typhon continued to terrify the Greeks, for Zeus split his body into pieces and scattered them across Libya, Egypt, and Cilicia, where the locals turned his remains into mountains. The discovery of Typhon's bones inspired cults across Greece, but none were more zealous than those in Ortygia, where the cult claimed that Typhon's rear end was buried in a local cave. They celebrated him as the Lord of Earthquakes, a title that combined his natural role as son of Gaia and Tartarus with the tremors that accompanied his battles with Zeus. History isn't just in the past, it's alive in the stories we choose to remember. If you enjoyed this journey, hit the like button, leave a comment with the legend you'd want to see next, and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter of the past.